Oh, hi there. I was just polishing my teapot for the 2021 RenderMan Art and Science Fair. Hey,
Oh, hey, I didn't
look,
see
it's
you.
Christos.
I was just reading this book on rendering pen and ink. It has some
That's
really cool
interesting.
hatching in it. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite books, and it's kind of apropos that you had that book because this talk, VR to stylized rendering, is about pen and ink stuff. So that's great. For everybody that doesn't know who we are, my name's Dylan Sisson. I'm in the RenderMan group at Pixar Animation Studios, where I've been doing some R&D kind of exploratory work into the new RenderMan Stylized Look system in RenderMan 24. I started at Pixar in 1999, and I also designed this, the RenderMan Walking Teapot. So that's me, and
I've got a few of those teapots lying around the office. I'm Christos Obretenov. I am the lead developer on the Stylized Looks system, bringing non-photoreal rendering into RenderMan 24 and beyond. So really excited at showing you some of the latest stuff. We got some new material. Dylan's going to show some interactive stuff, and we've got some kind of animated sequences as well. So looking forward to it.
yeah, we've been working a lot on this stuff actually in the last year.
Many
And
years, many years.
many years, multiple. And you're based in Vancouver, BC, in Granville Island.
Welcome. Yeah, hello from Vancouver.
And I am in San Francisco. To start off, Christos, I thought I'd just show one of these interactive videos of the stylization, because that's one of the coolest parts of the stylized rendering system. And here it is. And I'm just kind of going through building a simple look and just kind of walk that through for you and everybody in the audience. This is just a rendering in our image tool, of a diffuse lighting setup. And I've added a display filter that's going to create some hatching. And you can see that over in the right-hand panel there. That allows me to add my progressive textures that I've custom made. I drew my own custom progressive textures. And now we'll see that diffuse signal being used to drive the hatch on the teapot. And those are AOVs, right? That the display filters are using to create these different looks.
Yeah, that looks fantastic.
And I
love
just
the
got
paper
started.
background. I love the paper background.
There's more. Yeah. That's there's even going to be more. And I've orientated the hatching to kind of be in alignment with the lighting and the shadow to make it even cooler. And there I added a little bit of line work. So I did line work around the teapot that is thicker in shadow and thinner in areas of illumination, which I know we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. And then I've added another one for NZ, which allows, like if there's elements on the actual geometry, it'll draw the lines on this geometry. And here, I'm interactively, it's pretty cool. And that's real time. That's not, I haven't sped this video up or slowed it down or anything. This is as it happened. And so we can scrub through it, see the updates happen right away. What do you think of this look so far?
Oh, there you go. Little spec edition there too. Yeah, yep. I love how you kind of like started off basic, and then you've kind of got those slots for those display or sample filters, and kind of load those in like piece by piece, and then it shows kind of the buildup of it. And this is using, this is not any like different types of lights or anything like that. This is using RenderMan's kind of native physically based lights. So that's what I love about that. It's like just as usual with the lights, and then it's like this non-physically based system is responding to that.
And for these lights, they're just directional lights because they can get a nice, clean, fast signal from them.
Yep.
And two of the lights are just casting diffuse and no specular, and the other two are casting spec and no diffuse. And that way I can basically adjust the hatching, the black hatching, independently from the white hatching, so they don't have to be physically tied together. They can be what arbitrarily looks good to me. And here we're zooming in, zooming out. The lines are retaining the same thickness the entire time because they're computed pixel space.
Yep. And I love sort of kind of exploring a scene where, because you can do this interactively and move the lights around like you've been showing, and it is, you know, can be a physically based scene as well. I love just like when you get a cool look like this, like, you know, moving the camera, zooming in, like, oh, what would that look like? You know, like I know what it's going to look like when it's physically based, but like, oh, what are the lines going to look like if we zoom in or change like the hatching texture and stuff? So it's kind of fun. It almost makes it into like a cool little game or like a nice little visualization. So I love doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, having a part of the look dev process.
Yeah, you get all the that's why we're spending so much effort making XPU, so we can see what physically based rendering looks like as soon as possible. So as you move something, you get to see the result immediately. And this is bringing that same sort of interactivity to stylized looks. And it's not like you're going to have to guess what that looks like in comp. You can actually see it and tweak it. And
because a lot of this too is like the density, you know, of the shadows that you've had, and then and the spec, looking up all those different types of textures. It's like you really need to see that kind of live instead of kind of after the fact, because even if you did that part of it in comp, like you couldn't really, because like kind of a darker density would bring in a different set of textures. So it's kind of really important to do it in the look dev. Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, let me show you some of the slides that I have. And I did a bad job here with my slides.
It's okay. It's live. This is, you know, keeps it interesting.
It's okay. It's okay. It's only live. That's the most reassuring thing that anybody said to me all day. Let me see. So I'm going to go all the way back.
Folks, this is not pre-recorded. This is, you're seeing it.
This proves it to you. We are also human. Okay. All right. So here we'll start off on this slide. And I'll lower that. And so part of my talk is about the RenderMan Stylized Looks. And also part of it is about VR sculpting, because I found that the two are kind of interrelated. And so we've talked about this a little bit, Christos, but I wanted to kind of dig in and show it to you. First, stylization. There's a lot of stylization going on at Pixar right now. We just don't render everything physically based anymore. And we're looking at more different approaches. And in this talk, and there's a panel after this one with Pete Doctor and a bunch of really talented people from Pixar that are be talking about stylization, which is cool. I'm going to be talking about how I would create this illustrative look in the RenderMan Stylized Looks, which is my kind of artistic style and kind of my initial foray into the technology, was trying to replicate this look. And it turns out that I'm also going to pose you with a pop quiz, which is drawing or render, because 4 of these images are drawings and 4 of them are actually rendered with stylized looks in our 3D geometry. Can you guess which ones are which?
Can I point to them? No.
But you can think about it. Do you have an idea in your head which ones are which?
Are you asking me or the crowd?
I'm asking you.
Okay.
But also the crowd at the same time. So I
sort of know the answer, but
okay. So
but the thing is, it's kind of hard to, it's hard to tell, and then that's the cool thing about it. Like even me knowing what you've worked on, when I look at that, I'm like, oh, which is which, because you did such a cool job in matching that like very specific style.
Even I get confused. So here you can see the base geometry, and then you can see the final rendering based off of that geometry. And the lighting changed a little bit from shot to shot, but that's essentially the base geometry that was created in VR. So I found that the VR actually aided my stylized process immensely. And I wouldn't be able to get the end result unless I had started at the beginning with that sort of stylization. And so let me dig into that. this is the final result of it. So for Inktober, I did one of these every day. So I did a VR sculpt and a stylized render every day after work, and I thought I'd make it through a couple of days, and I got all the way to the end of the month, and it was
Awesome.
it was really fun because I really started appreciating what you were talking about, Christos, which is when you have the live drawing, you can move it around and find different compositions that you wouldn't have thought about otherwise without seeing it interactively.
And then even like daisy chaining, like you were saying, with certain lights, when you showed that first one, just having that flexibility of like daisy chaining different, you know, types of looks onto one particular light and then another one, and you can get like so creative.
Yeah, and there's certain techniques that are really effective for driving line work, or there's techniques that are effective for driving hatching, and it really depends on that signal that you're feeding the stylized looks, which is cool. And so here's kind of what the combination was. I have this VR sculpting, I have the stylized render. So the stylized render does a lot to make the image look good, but it really depends on all those other decisions that you make up to that point.
I love the split screen.
Love the split screen. It's for the win. So VR sculpting was something that I've been doing for a little while, since 2017. And for my colleagues who aren't familiar with kind of VR creation tools, I think they're poised at, you know, they're at the point where they're actually useful for doing production things and modeling, especially organic modeling. And here's just a bunch of the different tools. Adobe Medium and Masterpiece Studio, excuse me, are voxel modelers. So it's you can build kind of solid objects. You can get a mesh out of that object and really do a lot with it in a traditional VFX pipeline.
I have a question about that chart.
Yep. Yeah.
Is the X from XPU?
The well, it could be used in XPU, but that's a really good question. It's a, let's just say it's an excellent letter.
It just looks similar to the font in XPU.
It does look similar. It's the same. It is the same font. Maybe that was which is Gotham Narrow for all of you font people out there. The VR sculpting is interesting because it's really fluid. Like for me, I'm not a traditional sculptor, but I do a lot of drawing. So being able to go into the 3D environment and sculpt, like my approach to that is an illustrative approach, and I found that I could do a lot of things that I thought looked really great. You can zoom into these objects, so you can get a lot of fine detail. Like I model all the scales on this creature with by hand, but by zooming it up and just doing one at a time. So it's fun to work in. And once you get your mesh out, it's a voxel, so they're 3D pixels. You can output that as a poly mesh, and then you're basically good to go. You can take it and do whatever operations you want on it. And in this case, I brought it into Substance Painter, did some pre-visualization in RenderMan with a shader that I made to look like a 3D print, because my goal was to print these out. This is actually a bottle opener, and this is kind of the pipeline that I use, just to kind of show you a little bit of backstory. But this was the end result. There were 3D metal prints, and you can see that it's a metal, fully functional, fully operational bottle opener, and they can be printed at either size. So I printed a big one, so when I travel around, I can take it's like my garden gnome. I take them on vacation with me. Although I did get in trouble at the airport once.
I was gonna say, like, that's got to go over well at the airport. How big is it?
It turned out it didn't.
Oh, okay.
They pulled out and they said, "What's this?" And I said, "That's just a piece of art. I'm an artist." And the guy goes, I was like, what do you think I'm going to do with it? He goes, "Arr." I was like, no, I'm not going to do that to anybody.
When he said, "What's this?" you should have pulled out a beer and just been like,
That would have showed them. They have great senses of humor.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, they're the best. They're just the best. Essentially, though, if you look at all these forms, so they have a handmade form. So bringing my kind of line work that I do when I do illustration into 3D, it imbues everything with the kind of form that I would have, like if I did a drawing of it. And that turns out to be a really great base for a stylized look that I'm using to base off of my drawing. And the other benefit, why I could do one every day, is that the other benefit of VR creation tools is speed. So apparently I'm a VR battler, and I go to battle with other artists, and we get like 10 minutes to get a prompt and model something. It's working in computer graphics is much cooler with a smoke machine. That's what
Road to Tokyo. I love it.
That's crazy. Anyway, so RenderMan Stylized Looks, we just rolled that out in 24. This is something that you put a lot of effort into. So
yeah, super excited to have it out in 24.
It's great. And as you were saying earlier, it utilizes the entire DCC. So instead of just having RenderMan write out a bunch of AOVs that we put together in comp, we can actually leverage the existing shaders on your objects. So if you have a object that has a bunch of shaders, you can plug a stylized control into that shader and kind of toggle back and forth between PBR and MPR. That's cool.
And then not only that is, having that per object level, like on these slides that you have, because initially when I sort of like broad strokes, pun intended, trying to go for like a art look or thank you. Trying to go for like a, like an artistic style, then I'll just put, sort of similar hatching on everything and line work and whatnot. But then as you go further in and, ultimately if it's going to be on obviously more complex shots, then you want to go in, and if you're doing a car, the wheels are going to have a bit of a different treatment to it. You don't want to make it look, overly generic, but that's where like the slide that you have up now is like, it's integrated, into all DCCs with RenderMan, where you can change that in the actual shader, and then the stylization kind of, takes hold of that. So you can get really custom, do different line thicknesses on, various objects, and the hatching and tune. And we have some new tools coming up as well, which, will sort of go with that workflow as well.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to talking about the new tools at the end as well. And of course, because you're working within RenderMan, you have access to all the stuff that RenderMan knows about, as far as the lights and the light filters, projections, screen projections, triplanar projections. You can utilize any of those things that you're already familiar with.
Yeah, even where you have it right here, we've tried to, we make it pluggable upstream. You've got the PXR manifold, so all sorts of projections. Like I'm always, plugging in PXR nodes into it to do, various different things and modifications. So we kind of want to sit in that ecosystem of that people are used to with physically based, but then have the stylization workflow inside of it as well.
Yeah, so it's pretty slick to have it that integrated. Once you put everything together, once you're outputting your AOV signals, you have your shaders wired up with these controllers, and you create your display filters. You can create a display filter that generates something like lines, right? And I just made a couple examples of, you can have like a thick, strong line on the top left. You can have a line that is shifting in color from blue to red arbitrarily based on the intensity of the shading on that object. You can plug in different procedurals, right? And you can also drive it by things like lighting. So there's it's a little complex, but there's just so many options that you have to make lines. And the other cool thing, of course, that I like is this idea that you had of implementing like the progressive textures for hatching or shading. We call it hatching, but you can plug any kind of texture in there, and color textures too.
Yeah, and watercolor and whatnot. But so the hatching sort of name kind of stuck, but which works really well for that. But it's more of like a progressive kind of dynamic texture set that just looks really cool, especially when you're moving the lights around for it to just kind of do these different treatments in the shadow areas.
Yeah, well, and you can, like, if you look closely, if you're in the audience, you can look at the shiny part on that teapot, the bright one, and you can see it's actually looking up the first texture there. And then as the signal gets darker, it actually starts swapping into these darker textures, which allow you to do some really interesting things. And this is a hand-drawn texture that I drew based on just kind of classic comic work.
It's fun kind of coming up with, just because, like you said, you can hand draw them as well. So it's not like, obviously you can use Photoshop or all sorts of different software to do it, but you can just grab, your favorite felt or pencil and whatnot, and, just do those, scan them in. I love doing that. And then just, throw them in a scene and see what happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I used Procreate for these guys. And then I don't know if you know about this book, Christos, Rendering in Pen and Ink. If you don't know about it, you should get a copy, because it's a great book. Yeah. Oh, you have it. Oh, that's great.
Just reading about trees and foliage.
Cool. There's one example in the book that I wanted to talk about, which you can see represented in this example between 1 and 2. The lighting's essentially the same. You can tell because if you look at the shadows, the shadows are in the same place, but the artist has added more detail and contrast in the tower in the first one, and more detail and contrast in the archway in the second one, and that gives the viewer's eye a reason to go there. So these are sorts of techniques that we can explore using the stylized system, because we can add more detail to certain areas of the image if we want to, and use that to help convey the narrative.
Yeah, that's really cool how it's the same one, but your focus is drawn, to totally different areas, and it's not like your traditional, blurring it out. It's more the detail in the hatch.
Yeah, and it's not like a depth of field. It's
and it can be dynamic, technique. Right?
Yeah, it can be dynamic. And
like you can bring in the camera.
This is an example of a treehouse from one of our first RenderMan challenges. The image on the left doesn't have any kind of focus as far as the texture. It's just uniformly applied, this antique hatching that I have. And then the second one, I created a light filter that was nested inside another light filter, and used those signals from light AOV groups to draw the hatching up on the top. And then I could just move that rig down and have that hatching appear on the bottom area too.
This is the one that I really liked, how you did that, and I didn't even think about that, and it just goes to kind of show how we've kind of designed it like inside the existing RenderMan system. But I just hadn't been using light filters with them, and then you're like, oh, like, yeah, it totally works with the usual light filters. I'm like, oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's just hooked into all the other tools that are available, and then we put them all together, or I put them all together in this example where I decided to do my Inktober with this wacky method. And since
the ground truth,
and in this example, like you have the ground truth in PBR. That's what light is going to do in the situation, how light will be transported around the scene. In art, in a stylized art especially, you don't have a ground truth. So my ground truth for this particular project was to use 3 pens. So this is my pen pouch. I don't know if you have a pen pouch, but I carry mine around with me, and this is what I had in my pen pouch. And for Inktober, I used a brush pen. I did anything I could do with a brush pen, a white gel pen, or a Copic marker, and so I put those together and went for it. So this was the reference art, which was my own art from the year before. And this is an example of Pen Station Inktober. I made a pen theme, and I broke that image down into the elements that I thought I could recreate with this with a daisy chain of these display filters that we had been talking about earlier. Like when you saw the video at the beginning, and we added those line work, the hatching, and the kind of the white hatching at the end, the same sort of principle. And this was just me kind of breaking it down, looking at it, saying, okay, I think I can do it. So I went to my VR creation tool and started to model something. So 7 hours later, I had this herald object. I did that in Medium, and based off of one of the drawings that I did the year before. And here's the handmade form. So this is just an ambient occlusion render of it. And you can see kind of the forms. The forms feel like they're handmade. They don't have a lot of hard surfaces or straight angles.
And just right off the bat, like we were talking about that before, like even in modeling is kind of part of the stylization, because if you have super clean, geometry, of course you can add these stylizations in the the shader and the render. But if you're already starting off with something that the model has stylization to it, then it's just so much, not like easier, but just you can get a lot more creative, because if you throw some of our line tools, already just on this, it's going to look great kind of out of the box. Whereas if it was perfect, it would just look a little too kind of CG.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially with kind of the line work that I was going for, that I draw, like if I'm applying that to an geometry that I've drawn in 3D, like it really helps sell what that is.
Right.
Yeah. And so here's the physically based render with shaders from Substance. And here is a breakdown of all those different display filters that I was talking about. These are the actual outputs of each display filter, and they get kind of daisy chained together and combined into the final result. So you can see the line work. That's based on a Y up. So wherever the normal is pointing up, there's no line. Where it's pointing down, there's a thick line. The black hatch is taking a diffuse signal, and the marker is taking kind of that was a NZ, so it's more of a face forward effect. So it's an independent of lighting. And then there's the white hatch, which is taking the specular signal.
So which one is you said the Copic marker or something? Was that the white one? Is that the white hatch?
The Copic marker is this wash. It's that marker wash.
I got it. Okay.
So you can kind of do just kind of a general fill, and that I did that with the marker, and then I had a white outline, which is also kind of a specular too. So putting those all together, I hope I have a result of it, and I do. So here's the PBR and NPR kind of split screen. So you can see how it has that feeling like, oh, this was drawn, because in some ways it was drawn in the air and then had these textures applied to it. So that was the final result. And that was some of the early R&D we did. And so when Inktober rolled around again for 2020, I thought, well, why don't I just do the entire month like that and not tell anybody that I'm doing that, and see if anybody notices it.
It was 2020. You had all this extra time.
2020 was a weird year. And yeah, because in Inktober, if people draw with pencils or they use paints, people get in big arguments and flame wars on the internet about how you can only use ink. And so I was like, well, I'm probably breaking the rules by actually not using any ink and doing it all on the computer. But I was like, I put the hashtags in there, went for it, and actually made it through the month. And at the end of the month, I told everybody that what I had done, and they're like, that's cool. So I think everybody was, they were fine with it. So.
And you got some really good feedback from you while you're doing this, because you're like, hey, we were basically adding features to the system, because you know, you were like, how do I do this? How do I want to do that? And like even that white speck that you did on top, we sort of flipped the hatching texture. That's like a button in there now. And so it was nice to sort of get that feedback from you, you know, in a real sort of sense of a specific style.
Absolutely. I think in the context of developing tools for artists and for VFX, like you want to have a problem that's very specific, because it's in the specific problems that you're going to really discover like what you need to solve that particular problem, and whether it's you need a general solution or a workaround, or you know, some of these led to really kind of interesting feature requests, like lighting by lighting was one that we kind of talked about a lot.
I think the lighting, and then even like the white speck thing, I remember you had a different workaround for that, but it was, so even though it was like possible with, I think you were doing some light filters, etc., it's also like, well, let's kind of make that simpler and like put it like directly in the tools, like so we can present, you know, the user with like a UI that sort of makes it more obvious. So it's also like a simplified workflow. So it's like, I want that type of look. Okay, well, you know, that's that, you know, check mark or whatnot, and there's some, you know, features to sort of, you know, modify it, but just so you don't have to do these crazy workarounds.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I mean, it was great because you know, I'd have one of these ideas or crazy ideas or problems, and you'd turn around in a day and be like, here you go, why don't you try that out, and be like, oh, that's cool, or can it do this thing, or can it do that thing. And the other point is, like, you know, I was able to create my own personal style here with the RenderMan Stylized Looks. It wasn't like, this is what the software is going to do, it's going to make you be able to do this. Like it should not impose a limitation of the type of look you want. You should be able to go to it with what you have in your head and create that with the system.
Because like we talked about before, it taps into all the existing, you know, PXR tools with the projections, etc. In combination with that, a lot of it is very texture based, obviously, with like the hatching and the markers and the charcoal and whatnot. So a combination of those two things, you've got the rich tool set, and you know that comes with the DCCs and RenderMan. Plus, like I said, you can draw your own textures or bring in any textures. Sort of that combination obviously can hit specific styles, but it doesn't limit you to any particular thing. And you know, as we go forward, we're going to roll out, you know, more stuff in the preset browser, so folks can just get good stuff out of the gate and then see how it's connected, and then maybe like reverse engineer it and, you know, change it. But we want people to be able to just kind of crack it open and have a bunch of different looks to start with, at least.
Yeah, for sure. And
it's a cool one.
Here's just a couple examples of things that I did that month. To get this done, I just modeled one tentacle, took in the DCC Maya and just copied it 4 times and rotated it, and kind of gave it a Dutch angle, kind of found that angle while I was compositing it. And after I did a couple of these, I felt like the drawing process actually kind of happened inside the DCC Maya itself. So I wouldn't even do a sketch at a certain point. At the beginning, I was doing a little sketch. I was like, oh, it could look like that. And then I would just be like, I'm just going to kind of do this. I'm just going to jump in and find it. So this one, you know, that the target has actually a map. And that map is usually used to tell the display filter where to draw lines. So this is another technique that we can roll out, that you added to the tool set, that, you know, if you have like a t-shirt and has lettering on it, you can have the lines draw around that just as they're drawing in sections or in other areas of the object, which kind of a fun one. And the other thing I got to do day after day was cheat. So you know, there's these pens, like I reuse those pens a whole bunch. So
right. Oh, that's awesome, with the footmarks.
And then here's one that I did on 29. It was called Shoe, so I thought a shoe print would be fun. And there's just some spilled ink, and I took that bottle from day 3, so I actually just recycled that, and it looks like a new drawing. You know, people like, oh, that's a new drawing. I just like put it on its side and was done.
Reuse, recycle.
Reuse. reuse, reduce, recycle.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting. And on the image on the left, I thought the composition was going to be more looking down at the ink. And I had it like that for a little while, and it wasn't working for me until I kind of brought the camera down to the ground. And so you're kind of looking up at the ink bottle like a building.
Right.
And once I did that, I was like, oh, now it works. So there was some fun discoveries I did because I was able to interactively kind of go through the scene.
And especially with that,
discover stuff.
One of the white one that you have, if it's coming off of a spec signal, that, signal will change, a lot more drastically based on a camera move than like a diffuse or an ambient occlusion would. So, but it kind of makes it, fun with these, hatching textures, is that if that changes a lot, you kind of want to be in that look dev stage of moving, like you said, moving the camera around, because it'll get a certain hit. And you're like, oh, perfect. Like I kind of discovered that with one of the things we're going to show later. Is playing with, the spec going through the hatching is really cool because it just makes it a little bit more dynamic. So if that works, then the camera angles, get you a very, very different result.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I'll always decouple the diffuse light, and put it on one light and the spec on the other light, because then, if the diffuse looks good, then you just, sometimes you need to tweak that specular and get it just right in the right place to nail it. And
that looks awesome.
Here's Blade, which is there's an X-Acto knife there, and I'm going to zoom into that because this is one of the happiest things that happened to me was that looks like a blade, but if you zoom into the blade, you're like, it just looks completely abstract, and you don't know what it is. So
and how they're just wisping off into like really thin. The white looks really
super wispy, looks like an actual drawing. So I was super happy with that. And finally, I have a movie that I want to show you that's going to lead into some of these what you were also talking about.
Right.
Here's the ink, and here's the ink guy rendered in the Stylized Looks, and you can see just how neat it looks like as a drawing. And that brings me to this living illustration. I have a movie that I'm just going to bring up, and then we can just start talking over that. So let me see if I can find that. Okay. And at a certain point, I guess we can start taking questions, but maybe after this movie. So this is kind of for the people that didn't see the movie at the beginning, this is just basically taking that live drawing. So here's my interactive session where I have my model, and I'm adding a couple different display filters and just kind of scouting around the scene to see what looks good as far as like a silhouette or different lighting positions. So this is the kind of the workflow where you really kind of opened my mind as far as being artistically freeing. I had these models that I basically just drew, and then was able to go in and do a bunch of fun stuff with them. This is like just a funky animation test.
And I like how this one shows, because a lot of times we'll do like on a still, like, and I'll do it like a screen projection of, whatever brushes we're using or whatnot, because it looks really cool. It looks like it's kind of coming off the paper, but obviously that, doesn't work in animation ultimately where we're going. But this one shows you did some cool projections based on the light source on that. So it kind of like sticks during an animation. Yeah. So this one, because a lot of people ask like, oh, how which projection should I use if it's animated? And the answer is there's, multiple, different ways to do that, like a blend.
The answer is whatever you want to.
UV camera, like it sort of hooks into all that. And you've done, I think, the most creative ones where even that walking teapot, I think you showed last year, where it's kind of attached to the light and it was still moving a bit, because it's sort of that balance of like keep alive. Because if the textures are completely static, and that's fine, but then it looks like, oh, you could have just painted those on the UVs. But like the way you did with that walking teapot last year was they were deliberately sticking, obviously, but at the same time you had a little kind of wobble to them, like a keep alive. So it's kind of like, no, there's some dynamic nature to it as well. They don't have to just look like they're just painted on the UVs, because that's kind of what we're going away from, is we want to make the option for all this stuff to be dynamic, the line thickness by lighting and the shadow areas.
Here I took the light signal and animated the lights, so the actual signals were going to be varying over time. So that's why the hatching changes a little bit. I could tone it down a little bit, but there's a little bit of roto. Now let's go to the
keep alive versus, sometimes it can move around too much, so it's distracting. But that's really an artistic decision where, just like you showed those stills from the book of like, where do you want the focus? That works over time, right? Like
exactly. Let's show the Rebel bike and kind
Midnight
of the
Rebel.
NPR, PBR.
Yeah, that's a cool scene that Eugene had put together, the physically based one. And I love wipes and split screen, so
these are great wipes.
So I took like this physically based render, and then I actually just added the hatching through one light source. So there's a couple lights in this one, and you can see the one on the front of the bike is just physically based light. That's didn't touch the materials. That's all like PXR surface, like, quite a cool scene with a lot of different, Eugene did a great job in setting that up physically based. But then I said, let's put a light on the back and let's push, some hatching through there. And then obviously, build it up, based on the light signal, and just kind of, and this is, by the way, there's no compositing here. Like, this is straight out of my RenderMan. Like, there's and
straight out of RenderMan.
Straight out of RenderMan. That's not to say like other stuff we also write all these AOVs out, so it definitely supports a compositing workflow. But here,
and this is interesting because you can have your physically based model, and then you can switch to Stylized Looks and see it and rendered stylized.
So all in one.
Here you have like at the front of the bike you have that stylized look, and on the back of it you have more of that hatching look, and those are being created at the same time.
And just pushing it through a different light source. So then you're sort of putting the creativity in the hands of the lighting artist, as well as the shader, the material artist, but more of like a cinematography thing is like, okay, I can do certain things just with this light, and that then you're just kind of like, can't wait to see what folks do with it, because then you can get creative in so many different ways. And then here I also added some black lines to everything, so you can see in both stylized ones there's these kind of chunky lines that it's kind of going for like a marker, so it goes like really thick. You can see it kind of on the front wheel and on the seat, so it, in combination to pushing kind of the textures through the light, just had like a nice kind of outline on everything as well. So
and we could combine the PBR render with this look as well in the same scene. So it's pretty neato. Let's go to the car here. I think the car one's next. Yeah, here we go. So here's some more split screens. This is Christos's speciality.
Yeah, so Leif did an awesome job with kind of this physically based PXR surface and Llama car. And I always kind of wanted to hit sort of that. I have this like concept art in the back there. I can show like I have a few different variations of it. I can show kind of that closer up, but I've always kind of wanted to hit that. So just using some of the hatching and the line work, because there's really no like not much kind of stuff going off the geometry in that concept art. So I wanted to grab kind of the charcoal textures that we have like as a preset, and then the line work based off of like curvature, and also like the different kind of geometry types, and kind of work towards kind of hitting that artwork. So that was kind of fun. And then here, I just wanted to show like a, look dev aspect of it is, ultimately I went for like the charcoal textures, but in here, like I'm just using all these different kind of textures that kind of come preloaded. This was like a pencil. So, and then I have the white lines happening in here. So like in that kind of look dev process, kind of swapping around, the different texture sets and whatnot.
Cool. Should we bring up Leif? See if we
sure. Can I show a couple of
get some questions?
Can I show a couple of like different variations of this one, do you think?
You could bring one up while Leif comes on. Hey, Leif.
Hey, guys. Great talk so far.
Look
Love it.
Thanks.
I like what you've done with the Sterling model. It's really good.
Well, you know, you did such a bang-up job with the
physically based rendering. Stop it. It's on you.
Made me want to get back into physically based rendering.
There you go.
So this was kind of like, I like kind of this look. Like, can you guys see this? I just loaded up a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So this was different. Like, it wasn't going towards the artwork specifically, but I just kind of liked like just another completely, you know, different way. And, you know, what we want to show is like, it's, you know, you can easily kind of swap out the different textures and whatnot. It's not like they're totally baked in. So we have all these kind of different texture sets, and they all get like kind of automatically projected. So this was like kind of like a different kind of totally different feel to it that was different than the
with great power comes great responsibility and sometimes confusion.
But, yes, this was the charcoal.
Once you get a handle on it, it's great.
And this one was
those look really cool.
What I liked about this too is like, and again, like I just used Leif's setup for, you know, the physically based setup. And one thing, again, you get these like sort of happy surprises. Like I said, like I love exploring the scene, but what I loved here is, I'm just going to pause it, is if you look closely, you know, you can see the RenderMan little Easter egg on the tire, but you know, just using all the bump that Leif had done and everything that was going into the physically based scene. But then I was like, no, let's drive like a charcoal through that. And then I never even tuned that. I was just kind of looking at it. I'm like, that looks really cool. Like that, you know, just everything was upstream, right? So it was just inserted it in there. So now I kind of want to play, you know, even more with it. And, you know, even like doing the treads on the tires would be cool. But I just going by the concept art, like there was no tread on the
shadow is also something that's worth playing around with as well, and throwing a special hatching and a really saturated color, right? I mean, the possibilities around this, you can do that with like a separate light completely and totally break that physicality. So
and that's kind of on the next plate. Like I didn't get a chance to doing it, but like you were saying, like this really cool sort of marker kind of shadow would be really cool to do. So I'm gonna still kind of iterate on this.
Like this is a great transition point because we're talking about like breaking stuff, and like one of the questions is how are the textures blended and transitioned to, which I think is interesting, right? Because it looks like it just kind of works, but there's a lot of logic behind it with the AUVs and the lighting, and how does it all work really?
Yeah, so it's we just have these custom sort of like blending functions that the user has control over. So instead of your typical sort of like diffuse fall off or whatnot, even though we use a lot of those light signals or any of the light signals to kind of drive the hatching, because we're looking up like different sets of textures, there's just different sort of Gaussian functions and whatnot, or we kind of have like different functions under the hood that the user can choose, and then they can choose sort of the blending spread and whatnot. So they have control over, because a lot of times you'll get a scene and maybe the lighting is locked and maybe it did come from like a physically based scene. So you don't want to like, obviously running it through the stylized system, it's going to look, you know, different, and you might want to tune different things. So we sort of designed it in the way that obviously like Dylan showed awesome examples of like, oh, I'm moving the light in look dev and it's changing everything, which is awesome. But, you know, what if the lights are kind of locked? So those transitions into the different texture sets and whatnot also can be controlled just in the shader with, you know, different splines and controls of those functions. So if everything else is locked.
And one of the nice things is that you can send it arbitrary signals. So you can send the hatch display filter a diffuse signal, or you can send it direct spec or a beauty pass or whatever you want. And that signal can drive the hatching or texture in different ways. The ways and the progression can be, you know, it's pretty flexible as how it can be controlled with the display filter, like you're saying. And then we also have the ability to, like we were talking about earlier, is you have access to all of the ways that you would project a texture onto an object in 3D. So you can use, you know, any type of projection. So you can use a screen projection if you want, or you can use ST, or you can use a triplanar projection. And, you know, it's only limited to like that look that you're trying to get. And that's
the amount of like combinations, so right? Like the daisy chaining of the actual display filter allows you to actually add a hatching on top of another hatching, masked by a, you know, on a line and then displace that. So there's like so many ways to, go in there and literally layer these things, these controls, isolate them through lights, and just kind of get everything working in a really visual fashion, which is super interesting. I had another question here. How does it hold up with like really fast motion blur, and what kind of effects can we expect with more extreme motion?
Yeah, well, extreme motion blur definitely, would significantly change, the look of it. Sometimes a lot of these stylized, movies and whatnot don't have motion blur, or maybe they're rendered on 2s and whatnot. So the line work kind of gets interesting because we're doing edge detection. So if the signal is motion blurred, that's going to, create different results. Sometimes those are desirable. Like we've had really cool looking lines that just got like super thick to thin, and it's like, oh, that's amazing. But obviously, you want that controllable. So, there's some future kind of workflows we're talking about, getting those motion vectors, for example, and looking up those, and then deliberately creating line work on, something that's motion blurred. So definitely areas to explore there. As far as like the hatching and kind of more the tune looks, those are pretty stable over motion blur, just because those are, projections that are, depending on the projection, like we talked about, they're pretty stable, like over animation in general, like they don't flicker, they're very smooth because of those sort of weighting functions I talked about. And then the motion blur is a little bit more predictable.
It's kind of the correct answer is what the art direction wants, right? So if you have in something that's moving in extreme motion, it's all about the art direction, and the tools allow you to basically try and replicate that in different ways, and there's different technical ways of doing it. So you have your traditional cartoon character that just takes off stage, and there's just like a dust trail that goes after him or her. That could be done, and you could do that with the stylized looks. But that really kind of speaks to, it's not just about the stylized rendering, but it's about all the other elements that lead up to it, from animation to rigging to modeling and all of the things that you want for the final result. So, the textures are going to stick, but it's really what the art director and director are visualizing for it. Because maybe you have depth of field. Depth of field might get really blurry in the background, or it might shatter into a little different components or mosaic.
There's so many ways. Yeah, there's so many ways.
That's a great transition point, because we have time for one more question, and I think we should talk about a little bit about what you're saying is future tech. Where it's a two-part question. What would you guys like this plugin to go? We have obviously a roadmap of ideas, including the painterly style and that kind of like depth differences and all these interesting things. Where do you see the plugin going through the 24 release and beyond?
Yeah, well, like you touched, number one, definitely like we're constantly working on the line tools, so making the line work more artistic and whatnot, and even using different technology types between display, sample filters, even doing it like right inside of OSL. So just to give the user just more tools to use. So it's not even like a plugin. It's like a suite of tools, I would say. So a lot more robustness and variety of the line tools as we continue to build, bringing in a lot of the painterly stuff that we've been prototyping that we've seen before. So kind of brush bombers that go off geometry, but then also some really cool like smearing painterly, like the Kuwahara stuff we've been experimenting with. So bringing those ones in, and then even like what Julian Fong, touched on in the keynote earlier was really good, and more of like a real kind of, in-depth, like bringing in kind of more volume solutions to stylization, like beyond, because a lot of these things that we've been showing are texture-based, outside of the line work. But then once you get into like subsurface scattering, things that are volume effects, having textures doesn't really hold up because it's a volume. So what does that look like, for stylization? So going sort of deeper into those areas. So really, there's so many cool areas to go into, and I just gonna keep going.
I'd plus one that I love the off-edge geometry stuff for the brushes and the lines, And it would be fun to evaluate things like, because the system's open enough that we can implement display filters that are actually doing new things as there's new papers written and that sort of thing. So we could even look into style transfer or different types of approaches of combining some really interesting looks in there. And yeah, I think this is just the beginning of Stylized Looks and RenderMan. So I hope you guys get a chance to try it and let us know what you think.
We're having fun.
Thank you guys for an amazing panel. You guys showed so much creativity in this new tool set. People can go in there and play a lot. There's examples in our docs, and this shit is going to get more and more interesting as features develop. So thank you so much for joining us, and off to the next panel, also talking about stylization. So stay tuned for that in 4 minutes. All right, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.